Okay, great. Let's get started here. Thanks again for joining the webinar today. We're going to be talking about driving innovation, online communities best practices webinar. So really all the best practices in regard to driving innovation in your research community and also your online communities as well. We're excited today to be joined by Richard Millington. He actually joins us from London today, so it's a little bit late his time, but nonetheless, he's on the call and on the webinar and ready to share his insights as well. Richard is a founding and managing director of Feverbee. He's also the author of Buzzing Communities, How to Build Bigger, Better, and More Active Online Communities. And my name is Dan Fleetwood. I'm the president of Question Pro Communities, and we're excited to be presenting the best practices to you today. So also, to get started here and just to get a few housekeeping items out of the way, if you want to go on Twitter and put your questions or comments and use the hashtag communities best practices, we'll be monitoring the questions and comments there. So feel free to post your questions there, and we'll leave time for questions at the end of the webinar today. And you can also use the questions feature in GoToWebinar as well to ask questions. Either of those methods will work, well for these purposes. So to get started, and before we dive into, some of the best benefits of the best practices, rather, of the online community, let's first talk about some of the benefits of an engaged community. So these benefits really, stem from what you can do to make your community active and thriving so that you can get your research done quicker. This is, in today's day and age, getting your research done, sort of at the speed of light and an agile fashion is of the utmost importance. And I've often heard from clients that when they have an engaged community, engaged online community, they can get their research done 5 times faster than they normally would if you think about it in terms of a primary research study. It's also going to allow you to save money and budget. You're only going to be spending money on essentially the cost of the software and some recruiting costs to get the initial members into your community. But after you have that, there's really low maintenance costs and barrier to entry when you're thinking about that, as opposed to going out and spending money, on third-party panels and so forth that in the end will chew up a lot of your research budget. You're also going to uncover unparalleled insight. So some of the tools that are available in an engaged community or in an online community software, you're going to be able to uncover insight that you wouldn't normally be able to get in a traditional research sense. And we'll definitely touch on that further on in the broadcast as well. And you're going to have increased confidence in your research results. Listen, you're controlling your panel members, who you're letting in, and so forth. So you're going to have increased confidence that these members aren't being over-surveyed, that they're not being contacted too frequently, that they're going to be essentially treated with the amount of respect that you think a member should have in regards to a community. You're also going to be getting the benefits of brand promotion. So if you have a good engaged community, you're going to have an online member portal that matches your brand's look and feel, your overall brand image. And then also, when you're communicating with your community members, you're then also promoting that good loyalty and that intrinsic reward that that someone's listening to them, their feelings, their thoughts, and so forth. So it's going to create that great brand promotion or brand advocacy that you'll see. And then also greater participation, because these are your members and you're feeding them, you're nurturing them. You're going to have greater participation with some higher response rates as well. So these are the 4 main areas that we're going to be covering today in regard to some of the best practices. So we'll touch on the best practices around all of these different areas. So recruitment, and this ultimately is getting the best members into your community to match your research goals. Engagement, this is the part that Richard will mainly be focusing on here, is engagement. And this is really what you can do to community engage, some of the tricks and tips and the best way to make sure you have that active online community. Also, we'll be talking about data collection, and this is really some of the best practices in regard to collecting data from your community, whether that's with different tools like surveys, which is obviously the core, and then polls, ideation, topics, and discussions, and so forth. we'll talk about some of the some of the key areas there, and then also in regards to rewards, like what are some good ways to incentivize members, including a good point system to use, and also a good practice for different rewards to offer and so forth. So first is recruitment, and when we talk about recruitment, I like to think that recruitment is essential. It goes back to sort of the old motto or the old saying, garbage in, garbage out. And this is really true, I think, with communities, and ensuring that you get the right members in the first place will ensure that you get the results that you need in the end. So I think spending a little bit more time up front with recruitment and ensuring that you're getting the right people in or the right members in your community to match your goals is essential. You can have, many different segments in your community, but you want to make sure that you're getting, the right people in that match different avenues or different areas that you're going to be, focusing on. So, if let's say you're a gaming company and you have multiple different genres, you want to be able to make sure that you have people that play each of those genres, so you can send out surveys and you can do research on each of those different avenues with the utmost confidence that you're going to be reaching those folks as well. So when we talk about different ways to recruit, different avenues of recruitment here. So the best way, and the way that I like to go is, use a list of your customers. Chances are you or your clients, depending on, whether you're an end client or a research company, will have a list of customers that you can load into the community and start surveying them and getting insights right away. This is the best route to go, and chances are that list is just sitting there, somewhere in Excel, and you could really be making use of it, inside of a community. You can use social media. Social media is a great way and a great scalable way to reach out to people that, numbers to the masses, so to speak. So it's also a great way to, get multiple different people inside of your community. Just because you may be a little bit scared to use social media and that you think you can let everyone in, but most communities, or most community software companies rather, have different ways to restrict who exactly you're letting into your community, so you can filter it and really only use qualifying people that are going to match your overall research goals. And another great way is if you have a high traffic website or a website that your customers are going to, use your website, post a link on there, or post a banner if you can, or a pop-up that says, hey, we're recruiting for this community, we'd love for you to join, please click here now to do so. That's a great way to go about it. And if you don't have any of those methods, or you don't want to use those, and you're kind of starting from scratch, Question Pro can definitely help you out, or any other online community provider will be able to help you out as well to find the members that you're looking for in your community. So now I'll pass it over to Rich, and he's going to go into engagement.
Okay, thank you so much for that kind introduction as well, and for inviting me to be here today. So I don't have so much of a background in the data research space, but what I'm hoping I can share over the next around 15, maybe 20 minutes are some of the tactics that have worked really well throughout a whole different variety of online communities that have been used to drive really high levels of engagement. So when we're talking about engagement in online communities, typically what we're talking about are the actions that you can perform that are going to get people to participate more. And these usually fall within one of three buckets here, which are discussions, content, or events and activities. So I'm going to begin with discussions and focus most of my time on that, and then we'll get on to events and activities, and maybe content is for another time, or I can give you some stuff so you can download that later on. The problem with discussions today is that a lot of organizations out there find it really difficult to get out of a mindset like this, where they post a discussion, and this is a genuine discussion, by the way. They post a discussion saying something like, Cadillac had a really strong February sales month, up 60% due to this, blah, blah. No one cares about discussions like this because it doesn't sound like a human being. And the key thing about any type of community is that people want to feel like they're talking to other people. And that's going to be really difficult if we post discussions that sound like they're being created by a customer service department that accidentally stumbled into the marketing department and then had to go through a whole legal gladiator combat to get that posted. So we want to avoid discussions like these. We also want to avoid discussions like this, where a brand is asking people, how amazing are we? What is the coolest thing about our company? Because it just sounds fake. People are going to be taking time out of their free time, doing whatever it is that they could be doing or perhaps should be doing to answer your questions. So we want to get these questions as good as they can possibly be. We want to avoid doing things like this as well, where we might launch a community and have a lot of discussions in there, but look at how few responses we have here. Look at how few responses that we see. If we go to a community and it looks like this, no one is going to participate because it looks like no one is participating. And there's definitely a chicken and the egg situation here. If it looks like no one is participating, then why would you answer? Why would you participate? What value do you get out of that? So we want to avoid doing stuff like this. So we want to talk the way real people talk. And I know this sounds really basic, but it's something that is forgotten so often. Here's a really simple tip. Go to a community like or that targets a similar demographic to the audience you're trying to reach right now and look at the discussions. What do you notice about these discussions? They have a huge amount of self-disclosure. They talk in a very informal way. This is how real people talk to one another. So this is what we're trying to do here as well. We want to make sure that any discussion that we initiate feels as close to how real people would talk to each other as possible. Otherwise, we're going to drive a lot of people away. So let's look very quickly at 6 very simple steps here to soliciting useful information. So we can look at a couple of things. One is who asks the question. This is really important. The more familiar someone is with you or with the organization that's asking the question, the more likely they are to respond. And this means that it's very important that you personally, as in an individual, or not a brand account, but you personally are participating within that group. Because people want to feel like they're responding to actual people, actual human beings. And we've tested this dozens of times, and it's always the same result, which is if you initiate a discussion from a brand account, say Sony account, then people participate far less than, say, Susan from Sony. So make sure it's from a specific person. Second, the subject line is critically important. We're going to get onto this in a second, but the subject line is going to have the second biggest factor depending upon whether someone will participate or not. The third is the type of discussion. As we'll learn in a second, there are 3 different types of discussions that take place, and you shouldn't have too many of one type, but most people at the moment focus on one specific type of discussion, and I'm going to implore you in a few seconds to please stop doing that. And fourth is the content of the message. Fifth is the number of replies. So the more replies a message has, the more people are likely to respond to it. Which is why here's something that we tend to do a lot. In our Feedback experts community, which is experts.feedback.com, when someone initiates a discussion, or when one of us initiates a discussion, we always make sure there are people that are going to respond to it really quickly. Because the moment it has a few responses, it makes it a hell of a lot easier to get a lot more responses. And finally, the frequency of the post matters. If you don't have that many members, but you have lots of discussions that are going out, that's usually not a good thing. The frequency of posts should be very closely correlated with the number of members you have. The more members you have, the more posts you should be creating that. So let's go back to that subject line. And here's something that we forget far too often. That if you want an answer, then please ask a question. There are different types of questions. There are open questions, there are closed questions, but if you take nothing else away, if you want an answer, then make sure that you're asking a question. Because it's the subject lines, the discussion topics that are asked as a question that get far more responses than any other type. So what types of questions could we be talking about here? Well, one of them is what we call open questions. And I know everyone is familiar with what an open question is. So for example, what do you think about X? Open questions are really good because they're broad, they get you a lot of good qualitative information, and they let people riff on whatever topics or go in any direction that they like. But what's the problem with open questions? The problem with open questions is that people are more hesitant to give a response for simple reasons like they don't know how big or how long that response should be. They don't know what kind of format that should be in. They don't know what kind of words. They don't know what the right kind of answer looks like. So open questions are good, but if you're struggling to get a high number of responses, then I recommend using closed questions and specific questions instead. So do you think that X is Y, for example? This is a closed question. It's a really easy question to answer because the formatting is much easier for the recipient to respond to. Usually you don't have to reply as long. And so what we often try to do is have several closed questions in a row so people get more comfortable responding to questions, that they can then respond more to open questions, they feel more relaxed, and it's a lot easier to get more activity as a result. Another kind of question we really like are specific questions. So a specific question is looking for a specific numerical value or a specific word answer, something that is really simple to answer. So how much time do you spend on X is usually a great question to ask because people can respond to it really quickly, and also there's that element of curiosity about this. They suddenly become curious. How much does everyone else spend, or how much time does everyone else spend on this? Am I like everyone else? And this is one of the reasons why people come back to communities time and time again. They want to see if their answers are like everyone else's answers. Are they like the average, or are they different from the average? In fact, this is why it's often a very good idea, after a question has begun to die down, after perhaps someone hasn't responded to it for a couple of days, is to highlight memorize the answer to that. Send the answer out to most people, because then you tend to get a lot more response as well, and you drive people back into participating. You drive people back to that community to see what the answer was, to see what the summary was. And this again is a really key thing. One of the hardest things about building any type of community is establishing the habit to regularly visit that community. Visiting Facebook in the morning is a habit. Visiting YouTube when you're bored at work might be a habit. We need to make the community also become a habit. But it takes time, perhaps 3 to 6 weeks for that to happen. So we want to provide a reason for people to keep coming back to the community so it becomes a habit. And finally, if you're stuck, one final type of question we've seen work really, really well are what we call hypothetical questions. So what would you do if X? And you can come up with any kind of answer that you like here. But we find that hypothetical questions are really good because they're quite fun for people to participate in. They start to build that habit of regularly visiting that community and getting the habit of participating as well. And this is exactly the kind of questions that we want. So let's go next into the 3 types of discussions. If you were to look at your community right now, or in fact, if you were to look at almost any type of community on the internet, and if you were to begin classifying the discussions by any kind of category, what you find is that most discussions fall within 3 key types. These are 1, discussions that convey information. So if I ask you the time and you give me an answer, that's a very clear conveying information kind of discussion. The second are what we call bonding related discussions. If I'm asking you, how did you first get involved in this field? What first drew you to this field? That's a bonding related discussion. That's where you're disclosing information about yourself, I'm disclosing information about me, and as a result, we get to know each other much better. We start to feel a stronger sense of community as a result. The third are what we call status jockeying discussions. These are a little bit harder to spot, but it's usually where people are trying to show off to one another. So for example, if I were to say, what is the best way you've found of doing X? That's a very clear status jockeying discussion. If I were to post something that I've recently done or something that I've recently achieved, again, that's a very clear status jockeying discussion. So let me show you these in practice. So this is an example from a community called Coin Talk. It's for people that absolutely love to collect coins. A bit wacky, but it's a great community. So what do you notice here? Well, what you notice is that you can see the different kinds of discussions in action here. You can see the discussions that are just there conveying information. You can see the discussions that are bonding related discussions. You can see the discussions that are status jockeying discussions. And what you notice, by the way, is that the discussions that convey information are usually not the most popular type of discussion. But yet these are almost in every kind of community the discussions we're most likely to create. And this is a mistake. What we want to do is have far less discussions where people convey information and far more discussions where people get to bond with one another. Because, and again, we've tested this many, many times, we find that if you have more bonding and status jockeying discussions, people actually participate more. They get to know one another, they get to feel a stronger sense of community, and your community becomes a place where people want to come and participate time and time again. So we're going to be having less discussions that convey information and far more discussions that are related to bonding and status jockeying. Next, one of the really critical things is that people get to disclose information about themselves. By far, one of the best types of discussions are those where people get to disclose information about themselves. The more people know one another, the more they see that disclosure reciprocated, the better they get to like one another. The more you get to build that sense of community. So you want to be initiating, encouraging, and highlighting as many discussions as possible which facilitate that level of self-disclosure. And actually what we're seeing in maybe the 100, 200 communities that we've worked with is that there are actually certain kinds of discussions that seem to work really well in many different types of fields. So for example, bonding or status types of discussions we might initiate, which would be, how did you become interested in X? Or what was your big achievement in this field? Or what is your average day like? Or what would you change if ... These kinds of discussions may not convey much information that's useful to you right now, but they do something that's more important, is that they build that sense of community, they get people into the habit of regularly participating. So when you have a core question about a product, service, or whatever else you want to ask, you're going to have a much bigger group of people who are more likely to reply to that question as a result. And the key with these simple bonding and status-related questions is that first they're very immediate, they're very to the point. They use very short, simple words and sentences as well. And there's a clear call to action at the end. Here's a really important thing. Not only do you ask a question in the subject line, the way you structure that post as well has a big influence on how many people will actually respond to it. So we know, for example, that if you include a brief snippet about why you're asking the question, how it helps you, why you're asking it now, what we found is that far more people respond to it. Because people ultimately, they want to help. So if you can be very clear about how it affects you personally, not as an organization, but how it affects you personally, we've found that far more people are likely to respond to it because they get to know you more. They're more likely to want to help. So let's imagine we've done that when we've gotten really, really amazing at starting these great discussions, the kinds of discussions that everybody loves to participate in. The challenge becomes now, how do we sustain these discussions? And again, we've tested a huge range of things here. And here's what we've generally found. First, if someone initiates a discussion, they usually need a response within 24 hours. The quicker they get a response, the more likely they are to reply. And there's some data out there now, whereas if people don't get a response within the first 24 hours, not only does that discussion die, but these people are unlikely to ever ask a discussion again. Remember what you're competing against with any kind of community, which is if someone can go there and ask a discussion, they can also go onto any other website. They can search the internet. So your community has to be quicker, has to be better than whatever the alternative is. So we want to be responding within 24 hours. We want to be acknowledging unique and useful material. We want to be making someone feel good about asking that question without using these broad, generic terms. And it's also good to add your own thoughts and opinions as well. So if you're responding within 24 hours, which I think you should, then it's good to mention not only how useful that discussion is, how other people might be struggling with that same question as well, but perhaps to mention other members by name who might have an opinion on that topic as well. Because when you nudge people to participate, they're far more likely to participate. And if your platform allows it, then you can also mention their discussions in resources, in columns, and in other topics as well. There's a huge opportunity to turn your best discussions into your best pieces of content. You can turn a great discussion, you can approach someone that shared a great response and ask if they can write a resource or a column based upon that to document information, make that community a really powerful resource for everyone. And a final key thing I'll say about discussions here is that when someone visits your community for the very first time, picture what you want them to see. Imagine that when someone visits a community, you have a really short amount of time, perhaps 15 seconds, to find a discussion or to help them find a discussion they want to participate in. And so this is what we call the menu of discussions. What discussions do people see right at the top when they join that community? And it's these kinds of discussions we want to be influencing. We want to make sure that no matter what day it is, no matter what time it is, there's at least a couple of good discussions they can participate in, and hopefully discussions they can see from the very landing page of that community, because that's going to have a far higher conversion rate than anything else. Next, we're going to move on to events and activities, but I'm going to go through this really quickly because I'm very mindful of your time. What we find is that there's 4 different types of events. Those that are regular online. So these are the most common types. Webinars, for example, that we're doing right now, live discussions online, weekly interviews, or some sort of problem solving debate. These are all really good regular online events that can get people into the habit of visiting the community at the same time every single day. So, in addition to that, there's also regular offline events. If people can meet offline, perhaps that might not be so relevant for you, but we'll see. That's a good thing to have. Then we have what we call irregular online events. When you reach a specific milestone, when members achieve something important, when you're launching a new product, when you have someone that's so amazing, such a great guest speaker, that you can make a really big deal of it, where it's more of a celebration. And then there's irregular offline events, which is all the things you see in the bottom right here. Things like exhibitions and product launches and conferences, all these really cool things that members can meet up with one another, that can move the community forward, that can build these really powerful, really unshakable bonds among your members. So the key thing with events is that we want to have a regular schedule of them. We want people to know there's always going to be great material that's coming up. And if we can plan out a calendar that uses a weekly event or even a monthly event, that's usually a really good thing to do. And finally, let's talk about growth. I know we've touched upon it already in this webinar, but when we talk about growth, the way we look at it is through this typical marketing funnel here, but we adapt it to the community space, which is first people visit that community, and then they register to join that community, and maybe it'll be different depending upon what platform you're using, but they visit, they see something that they want to participate in, and they register to join. When they register to join, they then participate. After they've been participating for 3 to 6 months, they might become a regular. And then if they're really good and they eat all their vegetables, then they become a volunteer. They help you, they create more content, they do whatever it is you want them to do. And this is useful because at each stage of this funnel here, there are specific interventions that you can make that are going to get a lot more people to participate. And we can put growth into 4 tactics. You might recognize this from the marketing promotional mix if you studied marketing at university. If you didn't, then you dodged a bullet, quite honestly. But this matrix here still makes a lot of sense, which is there are four different types. Direct, there's word of mouth, there's promotional, there's search. By direct, we're talking about you reaching out to an audience that you already have or that already knows you. It's whereas you are personally inviting people to join and participate. We're using emailing lists and stuff like that. By word of mouth, we're talking obviously where your existing members bring new members into that fold. So when you have people that are sharing content, when there are ego traps where people are rating the top people in X and everyone invites their friends to invite them. There's social media, and there's all that word of mouth marketing goodness as well. Third is the promotional side. So this is the area that we don't go much into at all, but we really should. This is where we're talking about media relations, about getting positive publicity for your community, about blogger outreach, about building relationships with top bloggers and interviewing them so they mention your community, bringing in a bigger audience. There's a lot of really cool stuff you can do here. And then there's search and advertising and stuff like this as well. So here's the key thing about this. What we've seen is that the members most likely to become regular active members are those that are directly invited by you or those that are referred by your existing members of that community. But which of these four fields you use depends very much based upon where your community is in the life cycle and what you're trying to achieve. So if you just launched that community and you're trying to get those first few members to join and participate, then direct promotion is good, maybe word of mouth is good. But once you have that community that's established and is going really well, then focusing on promotion and search is good because you've already built that community. People are going to have a really good first impression. One of the biggest mistakes that we launched, and it's such a big mistake we wrote an entire book about it, is what we call the big launch. And this is where everyone has this massive launch. They invite hundreds of people to join, their whole mailing list to join in one day, and it's a disaster because people go there and all they see is an empty community or maybe a few discussions that you've seeded. Don't do that. Start really small and grow really steadily. So at each stage of the funnel, there are things you can do to improve your conversion rate. So at the visitor stage, we're looking at things like SEO. So if you were to go through your title tags, your meta descriptions, if you were to look at who's linking to you, if you were to sign up for accounts on, say, Moz or SEMrush, and analyze how your community is doing, there's going to be a huge potential to improve your SEO. I guarantee it. And this is really important because it's an easy fix most of the time. We know in most kinds of communities that around 60 to 70% of the traffic might even come by SEO. And it's so easy to improve your rankings if you just avoid doing the really basic mistakes. So if you read the content on moz.com or Inbound or any of those marketing sites, they can really help you with this. We also want to be directly inviting more people. If you were to analyze your funnel now, and you found that the conversion rates are usually pretty good from one level to the next, perhaps more than 20 or 30%, the problem isn't the conversion. It's the number of people that are visiting that platform in the first place. That's the number we need to get up. So we can do different things on the mailing list or on the promotional side. We can spend more time getting bloggers to write about it. We can host events and say invite the top 5 people in our field to discuss an issue. They'll promote it to their audience. They'll bring more people back to our community. There's lots of really cool tactics that you can do here. Next, we look at the situation where someone joins or someone visits but they don't register to join. This happens a lot. The conversion rates for most community hover just below 1%. And again, we've done a lot of studying of this. And again, the tweaks here are relatively simple to do. One is to have a very clear call to action. What is the benefit of someone joining your community right now? And can you say that in about 4 or 5 words? Make sure that the registration form is clearly positioned, simplify the copy, remove any field that you don't absolutely 100% need to be completed. And then start looking at a few other things. So usually when someone joins a community, there's a confirmation email that they need to click. I'm amazed at how many people don't click on that confirmation email. Um, so another thing you can do is also set up unique landing pages for different types of members. So say you get a fantastic story or write up on the blog of a top blog in your field. I would make sure that that link directed them to a specific page specifically for that audience, where they can participate in specific discussions that that blogger would be most interested in. So your conversion rates then are going to be much higher than they otherwise would be. Next, we look at the participation stage. One of the most frustrating things for a lot of you, I'm guessing, is that you get lots of people that register to join, and then they never participate. What's that about? So a couple of things you could do here. One is when they get that confirmation email, when they get that welcome email, don't say, congratulations on joining your community, blah, 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 interesting copy, the end. Instead, guide them to a discussion that they can participate in right now. So when someone joins, you can be like, hey, there's a really interesting discussion about X. I'd love your opinion on it. Here's a link. And if you do this one thing, I guarantee you your participation rates will be much higher. And there's other cool things you can do as well. So when someone joins, you can introduce the newcomers to the group. You can personally welcome them. You can highlight some interesting facts about them as well. You can create a specific area for newcomers to join. You can highlight the biggest upcoming events in your field that they might want to join, so they can sign up for them, they can get to know one another. There's lots of great things you can do here. Or a really simple one is to ask newcomers for their advice or their expertise, because we've found when you do that, they are far more likely to participate as a result. And finally, I know I'm running over time here, so please bear with me, everyone. How do you get people from participating to regularly participating in that community? So not just participating once, that's relatively easy. The hard thing is to get them to participate twice, or 5 times, or 10 times, or to turn them into a regular participant. This is where single calls to action don't work well, where building the habits works far better, where we have to build a much stronger sense of community instead. So this usually means things like having a ritual for members. So after 3 months or they're being a member a year, can we ask them something or have a ritual that they go through so they feel a sense of community? So one of the ones we like to use a lot is, what is your biggest mistake in this field? This works really well in the B2B space because everyone shares a really funny story about the biggest mistake that they made, and it's always a really funny story. Another thing we can look at is, can we start to guide these people into subgroups of people like themselves? People that are struggling with the same challenge, even if it's just an email introduction that we make to everyone. People that are based in the same location. Are there clusters of commonalities that we can use to build subgroups within that community? And finally, can we give people a sense of ownership and influence over that community? So this doesn't always work, but here's what we try to do. When someone makes a really great contribution to our community, what we try and do is say, I love that contribution, it was so useful. Would you mind answering future questions about that topic? And what this does is that it gives them a sense of ownership over this very narrow niche, or niche if you're in the USA, over this very narrow niche within that group. And that helps build a much more powerful sense of community. Because once they feel that ownership, they start initiating new discussion on that topic, they write columns, they invite more people. So it's a really powerful thing to have. Anyway, I really hope these engagement tips have helped a lot. Dan, I'm turning it back over to you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Richard. Yeah, I think that was very interesting. I really liked what you said about you need to make it a habit for them to go to the member portal or the online community to, to really make it more like they're going to YouTube or Facebook or something that really draws them in. I thought that was really great. So let's we talked about recruitment. Richard touched on engagement. Let's now talk about data collection and some of the, in regard to a research community, some of the best ways that you can, collect data and some of the best practices around that. So when we talk about data collection, we're really talking about surveys or polls We're talking about topics and discussions similar to, what Richard mentioned. More, I think what Richard was talking about was more in regard to, engagement and different ways to engage via discussions. We'll switch and talk about a little bit more about how you can also treat those as engagement, of course, but also around data collection and the data that you'll get, from those topics or discussions, and how you can use that. And then we'll also jump into ideation and some of the best practices around using ideation to, to get the insights and stuff that you've never, honestly, the questions that you never really, thought to ask. So first here, let's jump into surveys. So at the core of a research community, I think, surveys are the center of it, and it's really a great way to collect data from your community. You can segment and send specific surveys to different groups of members depending on the purposes of your research. And what we've seen with great success is that when you have enough community members in an online community, that you can really segment it in different ways and really get, the insights that you're looking for on a regular basis. And in terms, let's switch gears here to frequency. It's kind of the magic question is, how often do I, survey my audience or my members? And I think it really depends. I know that's not a great answer, but ideally, I think you're sending a survey to each member at least once per month, and that's especially if it's members in a certain segment that maybe you're not surveying or reaching out to all that often. You at least want to send them a survey once or twice a month, just to let them know that, hey, you still care about them. They're still a member of the community, and it doesn't have to be long surveys. They can be, particularly short in nature, especially when you're treating it as an engagement piece. And it's mainly just, especially for the people that you don't reach out to on a regular basis, that you are, showing them some love, so to speak. And then another great way, in addition to surveys, is also with polls. So polls are just a quick, easy way to get, feedback. They're great for engagement. And ideally, inside of a community, that you'll have a new poll added each week, if not more frequently. This, again, goes back to, kind of what Richard was mentioning in engagement, and that you want to make it a habit. You want to give them a reason to go to these online communities, and a poll is a great way to do that, because they'll log in, they can see the poll there, answer it, and then it's that immediate feedback that they're getting to see, how they answered in relation to others as well. So, another way that you can collect data is via topics and discussions. And I know, Richard talked a lot about the engagement, but let's kind of shift gears and talk about more in terms of, topics and discussions, and how you can use that to collect data and some of the best practices around that. So really, like, a topics is kind of like an online discussion forum. One thing it does, and, enables collaboration between members. You can get, really unplanned but valuable insight. I mean, in a discussion, you don't necessarily know what the member is going to post, although you can tailor it via, setting up specific categories and so forth that you certainly want to tailor to the discussions to. And another key, I think, best practices, you certainly want some moderation of the posts, but I would try not to over police it. Let the members, kind of speak freely, unless, of course, it's really, something incriminating about your brand or the community. You certainly want to block that, but definitely let your members, speak, and that's how you get the really, the great insights, especially when there's that cross collaboration between, different types of questions as well. And we recommend that you have, topics ongoing inside of each community, or discussions inside of each community. I think that's, a best practice. It's a great engagement piece, and, kind of going back to what Richard mentioned, it's a great way to get them going back to the community on a regular basis. And then we also, a great way to collect additional insight is via an ideation board. So really, this centers around, and some of the best practices for an ideation is, it allows members to have, you get open innovation from members, excuse me. You can use the power of crowdsourcing. So if you have ideas, or you want members to be able to come up with ideas, and you want to know, devote that idea up or down. You can definitely get the popularity of the idea there as well. Members can post ideas and other members can vote. I think that's essential. It's a great way uh, in terms of an engagement piece, but also to get insights and to collect data that, really to questions that you may have never thought to ask. I mean, especially when it comes to, people posting ideas, you want to give them an open outlet to where they can post those ideas as they, as really as they think about it, honestly. So if they're in a store, if you're a supermarket and you have a community and shoppers are in your store and they have an idea about how to improve, maybe it's aisle size or a check stand. You want them to be able to go into the ideas board, post that idea, and then you can get the immediate feedback from other community members as well on whether that is a good idea or not. And also there's a management system to where you can tell the members that, hey, this idea is in review, it's in progress, and so forth as well. So it's a great way, to collect data from your members and also to get, those ideas as well. So let's switch gears and talk about rewards here. And I know we'll leave time for a few minutes for questions, and any questions that we don't get answered, we'll definitely follow up with you, via email on those. But really with rewards, there are, different types of rewards. So there's definitely intrinsic and extrinsic rewards. And what we mean by that is the intrinsic is the feeling of helping someone out or doing something good because it makes you feel good inside. It's that, I want to help other people or do stuff for other people because I'm helping out. And that's really some of the intrinsic, intangible reward of participating in the community. You also have the extrinsic rewards, and this is really, hey, kind of put your money where your mouth is, so to speak, is that you get points and, for doing these different tasks in a community. It can be if you complete surveys or discussions, and then you can exchange those for points for, gift cards or swag or badges. And, badges are a great way as well to induce that level of achievement as well. So it really all centers around gamification and that people want to keep earning more badges. They want to keep leveling up. And a good practice is that, you have many different types of badges and you can base it off things like profile completion, high number of points earned, most discussions, in a certain month, different levels of achievement like that give people that extrinsic motivation to, to want to complete, more and do more inside of your community as well. And, let's talk about a good point system and reward system in really a way that you can get the most out of your community as well. So if you're using a good point system, it's ideal and paramount that this is set up correctly. You want to make sure that, from the start that you're not giving away too many points for certain tasks and you're not undervaluing those points and not giving away, enough points for a certain task. So that way there's sort of that sweet spot that you get between a member feeling like they're getting enough points for completing a certain task. And when I mean task, I'm talking about, surveys, discussions, if they're participating in any ideation. You want to make sure that you have a good points system in place as well. So I'll touch on two different point systems that I've seen work well. The first one is, if you have 100 points equal to, a $5 gift card and 400 points equal to a $20 gift card. And inside of that, a good rule is if you go in with that point system, that you can make each survey worth about 20 points, and that's an average survey that's somewhere between 10 to 12 minutes. And they're also getting a few fringe points off of discussions and so forth. But that's a good point system to use. Another good point system to use is make each point worth a penny, and that's sort of you can easily do the math. 100 points equals $1. So that's another great point system to use. And then in terms of rewards or gift cards and so forth, it's best to offer not a ton of gift card options. I think a few, but lots of different denominations. So you have a $5, $10, $20 denomination, and honestly, the gift cards that we see that get used the most or that are the most popular are the Amazon gift cards, iTunes, and Visa gift cards. Those are the most common inside of a community. So that covers the recruitment, engagement, and data collection, and also some of the best practices for rewards. What we'll do now is we'll open it up for questions. So thanks again for joining our webinar today, and let's open it up for questions. I will see if we have any questions coming in now. Let's see. Richard, it looks like we have a question from you from Kathleen. So she asks, when dealing with multi-ethnic groups, is there a best practice to follow to respect all peoples?
That's a good question. That's one I've never heard before, and I must have done so many webinars. Um, no, I don't think there's anything unique to a community in terms of best practice, but there's a couple of things that are important. And these won't be specific to communities, just general life things, I guess, which is so many words, terms, and phrases are so loaded with different associations depending upon different ethnic, different cultural groups, and it's difficult to walk that fine line of selecting words very carefully to appeal or that are acceptable to every single group. But the interesting thing is that most types of communities don't tend to have a massively diverse mix. And so I don't think there's any best practice that I can think of. I haven't come across any guidelines for anything that be unique to communities. But if you do, I'd love to see them because it's one of those questions that we don't really spend much time on, and we really should. But I love that question. I just wish I had a better answer for it.
Yeah, Richard, do you find that often communities are made up of the same ethnic groups, so to speak, so that way it's a little bit more, I guess commonplace that the best practices will kind of flow from that? Or do you find that you deal with communities that have many different ethnic groups?
It varies a lot. I mean, if I were to go through our clients now and the kind of communities that they're building, they range from a company that sells blenders to an international aid organization to I don't know, a wide variety. And what seems to happen when it comes to a community around a hobby or a passion that people choose to do, different ethnic groups tend to, not always, and I know I'm stereotyping a lot here, and I know how awkward that can be and how risky that can be, but different ethnic groups tend to cluster around the same kinds of fields. Again, not always, and it's not a law by any means, but they tend to. I mean, if we were to look at sports, it's very clear that certain ethnic groups tend to associate more with different kinds of sports. In non-profits, we haven't seen that be the case at all. I think it's much more diverse. And again, it's not just about the ethnic groups. It's about demographics. It's about age. It's about gender. It depends so much upon that field. So if we look for communities that sells blenders, or people that love that kind of community, I think it tends to skew more white, tends to skew a bit older because the blenders are more expensive, and generally speaking, old people have more money to spend. Um, yeah, so I mean, I don't really have a good answer, but I love the question. I really love the question.
Yeah, and then a follow-up question to that, or a similar question is, are some cultures more accepting of communities and some less so? I think, and I can kind of speak to this a little bit. What we found is, I think, really, I think at the core of any culture around the world is that, community is at the core of it. So whether if you take online communities, out of communities in general, is people like that sense of community. So I think kind of going off of that, I haven't really found that some are more accepting and some less. So I think you're going to find different groups of people within each culture that are probably more likely to want to participate in a community. But as far as culturally, I haven't found anyone that's more accepting of it or not. Richard, what would you say about that?
I would say that the interpretation of community and the priority given to community varies by culture a lot. Um, so if you look at Hofstede's dimension of culture, where like with the individualistic cultures, usually of the West, and the more collectivist cultures of the East, collectivist cultures tend to comprise of people that engage in more pro-social behaviors, which is they put the group before themselves, you know? They tend to value the importance of being a member of the group before themselves. Where in a more individualistic cultures in the UK and I think especially the USA, people tend to put themselves before the group. And that's not, I don't think there's a good or bad thing, it's just different cultures interpret community different ways. So a community in the USA is more about a collection of individuals who each has a unique capacity to contribute to that group. Whereas in more Eastern cultures, I think, and I don't know about ethnic cultures at all, I've seen no data or studies on it at all, but it tends to be more about the group is more a more pork-like entity, I guess, where they tend to comprise of people with very similar skills that whose main connection to each other are the location they're from or the experiences that they've been through. So it's a slightly different thing. Yeah, but again, these questions are really interesting.
Yeah, they're actually really good. I'm reading through the list here. We have a lot of questions. I don't think we'll be able to get to all of them today, but I see a few here that we might be able to answer quickly before we're out of time here in a few minutes. Um, uh, Lysandra asks, in most organizations, what role typically owns the community? And I think this varies between a research community and a marketing or online community. I think
Yeah,
in a
definitely.
research community, I think we find that it's really the consumer insights, market research, user research group that really owns the community, and then different departments within the organization will definitely feed in and want to get research from, or get their voice heard and get research out from the community. But I'm guessing with you, Richard, it might be a little bit different in that the role might be more in marketing or something in that regard, I'm guessing. But I'll let you speak to that.
Yeah. Yeah, it tends to be more marketing, customer service, sometimes innovation as well. Oh, by the way, if you go to download.feedbe.com here, you can get half my book for free and a bunch of other stuff for free as well. So if there's any questions you don't get answered here, that might be able to help. But yeah, I think those three seem to be the most common ones that we find.
Okay, great. Well, we're just about out of time here, but yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to email us. Feel free to, our email addresses are there. Richard and I are both happy to answer your questions. And we'll definitely go through this list of questions that we got from the webinar today, and we'll get those answered for you, and we'll email this out. Thanks again, everyone, for joining today. We had a great time, and we hope that you learned stuff, and it was also fun and enjoyable for you as well. All right, thank you everyone for joining, and hopefully we'll be in touch with you all soon. All right, thanks.